What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. Hope all is well wherever you are. We hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and that you're excited for the Dallas Cowboys regular season to begin. We are just about a week and a half away. Before you know it's going to be a week. Before you know it's going to be here. The preseason is officially in the rearview mirror, and we did it. We made it. All 32 NFL teams are finally done with the exhibition part of the NFL calendar. But all 32 NFL teams hard at work because on Tuesday we have a lot of decisions to make. That's right. Tuesday, August 31st at 3 p.m. Central Time, every team in the NFL is going to be halved down to 53 players on their roster. I messed that sentence up, but don't worry about it because teams are not going to mess this up. Teams always get these decisions, right? Teams always cut the right players, always keep the right players. There's never anything to kind of, second guess yourself about. That's a lie. These decisions are going to be final. In fact, these are going to be billed as final 53-man rosters, but there are going to be a lot of things that happen in the following 24 hours once these things are set that are going to really change, I wouldn't say a lot, but a significant amount of how every team's roster ultimately looks heading into week one. It is time for our official 53-man roster prediction here on the Blog of the Boys YouTube channel. Please do subscribe. We have a number of roster predictions available for you on the site as well. Go check out bloggingtheboys.com. But we wanted to put this video together because there are a number of distinctions surrounding the Cowboys in our present moment. There are a lot of roster loopholes, a lot of ways teams can stash players, things like that. And so we wanted to make sure that we applied the proper context before you ultimately did a 53-man roster prediction of your own. If you have one, you want to send it to us, tweet at us at Blog of the Boys. You can hit me up on Twitter or Instagram at RJ Ochoa. You can also shoot me an email, which is, rj.ochoa@sbnation.com. I almost forgot my email address there for a minute. All right, let's begin. First things first, the COVID list. At present time, at the end of Sunday's game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Dallas Cowboys had 4 players on their reserve COVID-19 list: Carlos Watkins, CeeDee Lamb, Damontae Kazee, and Connor Williams. Defensive coordinator Dan Quinn is there as well, but obviously he does not count against the 53-man roster limit. To be clear here, these 4 players are all going to be on the Dallas Cowboys 53-man roster. However, players on the reserve COVID-19 list do not count against the roster from a numerical standpoint. So if we were to fast forward, hypothetically, the Dallas Cowboys could technically carry 57 players. You feel me? Because they could have 53 players on their roster and these 4 players on the reserve COVID-19 list. That is assuming that these players stay on the reserve COVID-19 list. Mike McCarthy spoke after the team's loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars in their preseason finale on Sunday and said that he expects everyone who was on the Cowboys COVID-19 list to be back in the building by Thursday. Now, Thursday obviously comes after Sunday, so McCarthy could mean that these players are not going to be activated from the list until Thursday. If they are activated from the list prior to Tuesday's deadline at 3 p.m. Central Time, they will count against the 53-man roster. If they ultimately make it past Tuesday's deadline, then any moment when the Cowboys bring any one of these players back, they are going to have to take somebody else off of the 53-man roster. What goes up must come down type thing. So let's go ahead. Let's get into it. We are going to count these players against our roster for now. So we are going to kind of look at a blend of things, what this roster is going to look like on Tuesday at the deadline and what it will look like in actuality when these players return from the COVID list as well. There are some other distinctions that we'll explain as we get there. First things first, quarterback. I have Dak Prescott and Cooper Rush as my 2 quarterbacks on my 53-man roster. I know what I said in our post-game show on Sunday. I know that Garrett Gilbert kind of won the competition Sunday afternoon against Jacksonville, but I think that the Cowboys are maybe not sold on him enough, or rather sold on the idea that he's not the guy. And I'm not saying that Cooper Rush is the guy either, but I think that Cooper Rush is the better option. And again, this is an incredibly low bar here. Now, maybe the Cowboys ultimately cut Cooper Rush because there's somebody on waivers who they claim, there's somebody who they ultimately sign. Maybe they get bold and trade for somebody that isn't Gardner Minshew. But at present moment, behind Dak Prescott, the best quarterback on the roster for this team is Cooper Rush. And again, that's not saying that he is good, but that is saying that if the Cowboys have to have somebody that isn't Dak Prescott play quarterback for them, I suppose the Cooper Rush is the least bad option. So I have 2 quarterbacks on my roster. The Cowboys carried 3 last year, but obviously it was a very unique season. Let's move on to running backs, where I also have 2 players, Zeke Elliott, Tony Pollard. I don't think this is shocking, especially in the aftermath of Rico Dowdle being placed on injured reserve last week. I know Jaquan Hardy's a fan favorite. I know he was on Hard Knocks last week. I'm rooting for him just like you, or maybe he's a practice squad guy, but it's so hard to see even Tony Pollard getting a strong share of opportunities with the Cowboys this offseason in terms of the offense and how things are split up. So beyond that, I really can't see any running back really offering the Cowboys much. They're going to have to go long elsewhere, especially on the defensive side of the ball. We'll get there. But I think this is Zeke. I think this is Tony Pollard. And I think it's a pretty easy decision for the Cowboys. Now, we move on to wide receiver. And I know, hot take here, I have Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb leading the way. Yes, for real. Cedric Wilson, Noah Brown round out my wide receivers. I only have the Cowboys carrying 5. And I owe an apology to Noah Brown. And I've said it before, but I think it's important. When the Cowboys drafted Simi Fehoko a few months ago, I said here on our live show on the Blog on the Boys YouTube channel, I said this probably spells the end for Noah Brown and his time with the Cowboys. But Noah Brown has proved a lot of people, including myself, very wrong over the course of camp. In the preseason, he has really developed into an even better wide receiver than we've ever seen from him before, and he's been pretty solid at different times. And he's really fought off Simi Fehoko to the point that I don't even have Simi on my 53-man roster. And I know what I've said before too. I think we do this as Cowboys fans, and I think every team's fan base does this, but we get to this place where we say the team can't cut this player. They can't waive him because somebody else is going to claim him. Somebody else is going to want him. Somebody else is going to poach him. And that might be true, but Simi Fehoko hasn't really shown that much in preseason to really be worried about that. And maybe you're enough of a conspiracy theorist to believe that that's been by design. Maybe the Cowboys have hoped that they would be able to stash Simi Fehoko on their practice squad, and that by not highlighting him during the preseason period, nobody else would really be aware of him. I thought it was interesting that San Francisco 49ers general manager John Lynch said during the Pro Football Hall of Fame game, when he was up there as a member of this year's class being honored on the call with Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, that the 49ers themselves had interest in Simi Fehoko. Obviously, there's the Stanford-San Francisco connection and whatnot. And so maybe other teams have too many players that they're in love with now. Everybody has a Simi Fehoko, a player that they're worried to waive, worried to cut for fear of another NFL team picking up, stashing, poaching, whatever you want to call it. And so I think that the Cowboys have just reached that point with Simi Fehoko. I don't think we need to pay a whole lot of stress towards the wide receiver 6 position on this team. So I don't have him making this team, but we will get to Simi and some other players in a little bit as we move on. Moving on, though, to tight end. I have 4 tight ends making the Cowboys roster. And this surprised me, or at least this would have surprised me 3 weeks ago. I have Blake Jarwin and Dalton Schultz, obviously tight ends 1A and 1B. I have Jeremy Sprinkle and Sean McEwen. Now, Sean McEwen had really come along and really established himself as the tight end 3 on this team, kind of the way Rico Dowdle did at running back. Obviously had the sprained ankle a few weeks ago, and so his immediate future has kind of been in flux. His future as far as his status with the team and being cut has never been something that we've considered, but whether or not he would begin this season on injured reserve is something that we've been paying attention to. On Sunday morning, prior to the preseason game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, ESPN's Todd Archer tweeted out that Neville Gallimore, Sean McEwen, and Josh Ball are expected to be moved to injured reserve after 1 day on the roster to make them eligible to play this season. And when you think about this, if you don't know, if you're newer to following the NFL, if these rules are complicated to you, any player who is placed on injured reserve prior to the final 53-man roster being set is not eligible to return during the regular season. Players for the Cowboys like Reggie Robinson, like Shewo Olanilua, like Anthony Hines, who reverted to injured reserve, like Hunter Nicewander, who reverted to injured reserve, both of them after being waived by the Cowboys, like Rico Dowdle, who was placed on injured reserve last week. None of those 5 players can return to the Cowboys roster this season. They are on injured reserve. They are stashed, as a lot of people like to say, until 2022. However, players who are carried onto the final 53-man roster that are then placed on injured reserve are eligible to be pulled back off of it during the season. Last year, the NFL, in response to all of the roster trickiness that happened with positive tests and whatnot, allowed for an infinite number of players to be brought back from injured reserve. A long time ago, you could only bring 1 player back from injured reserve during a season. Then the NFL upped it to 2. This is a nice development as far as roster construction is concerned. So it makes sense for the Cowboys if these players, Neville Gallimore, Sean McEwen, Josh Ball, need some more time to get right to carry them on to injured reserve. But like we said, they have to carry them on their final 53-man roster first, which means they have to make the 53-man roster for that distinction to apply. Something to consider is that if and when that happens, more of a win proposition in this particular case, that moving these 3 players to IR specifically will open up 3 more roster spots, which the Cowboys at present time have 4 players on the reserve COVID-19 list. So there are 3 spots that we just opened up. But that is why I have Jeremy Sprinkle making it at tight end, because for some stretch of time, the Dallas Cowboys are going to need a 3rd tight end with Sean McEwen not around. So, sometimes that's just how things go, is somebody's hurt, somebody's out, somebody's absent, and somebody else takes the roster spot for at least a little bit of time. Let's move to the offensive line, though, at tackle. Tyron Smith, Lyle Collins, Ty Nsekhe, Terrence Steele, and Josh Ball. Again, Josh Ball has to make the roster to be able to be eligible to be pulled back from injured reserve. I don't think any of this is shocking. I know people weren't fond of Terrence Steele last year, but I think he really is developing. That's not to say he's turning into an amazing player, but it's not like the Cowboys have a promising swing tackle in Ty Nsekhe. Their tackle depth is something we've been talking about forever. It's something that is concerning a lot of us. However, these are the options that they currently have. So I have 5 tackles on my team. Let's go to guard now, where I only have 4 players. I have both Connors. Again, Connor Williams technically right now on the reserve COVID-19 list, but Zach Martin, the best guard in the NFL, Connor McGovern, and Brandon Knight. Nothing shocking here. And we go to center, where I only have Tyler Biadasz. I do not have Matt Farniok on my roster, as you may have noticed. And I do think because of the roster shuffling that is going to be happening all throughout the course of the following 24 to 48 hours of this roster being set, I think that Matt Farniok is somebody who's eligible for the team to ultimately bring back when it's all said and done and the dust kind of settles. But those are the players I have on my roster. Let's take kind of a grand 30,000-foot look at it. We've got Amari Cooper and Cedric Wilson at wide receiver there at one end, Tyron Smith and Ty Nsekhe backing him up at tackle. Connor Williams, Tyler Biadasz, Zach Martin, Lyle Collins round out the starting offensive line. Other reserves, Connor McGovern, Brandon Knight, Terrence Steele, and Josh Ball. At tight end, Blake Jarwin, Dalton Schultz, Jeremy Sprinkle, and Sean McEwen. The other wide receivers, Michael Gallup, Noah Brown, CeeDee Lamb there in the slot, although I think we all believe that Kellen Moore is going to use him in a variety of ways. Dak Prescott and Cooper Rush, your 2 quarterbacks, and Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard, your 2 running backs. You will see that I do not have Nick Ralston, the Cowboys fullback, on my roster. I do think he's another candidate like Matt Farniok. When the team figures out all the configurations they have to do, all the roster moves, all the adjustments, all the whatever, I think that they might bring Nick Ralston back in that moment. But the reality is that when you're setting your 53-man roster, the players who you plan on potentially bringing back, you have to cut the ones who are expendable in a literal sense, but are also the lowest risk to ultimately be poached by other NFL teams. That's why I don't think Nick Ralston is a threat to be lost. I don't think Matt Farniok is a threat to be lost. I think these are the players the Cowboys have to carry when they initially set their 53-man roster, and they can ultimately figure out things as they move along. We are going to move along here on our 53-man roster construction show, episode, whatever you want to call it. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. We'll start with defensive ends. DeMarcus Lawrence, the true war daddy on the Cowboys roster, not a shock. Randy Gregory, Terrell Basham, Dorrance Armstrong, and Bradley Anae. Again, Chauncey Golston is a different factor here. I told you there were a lot of distinctions because he is on the physically unable to perform list along with Tristan Hill. They are not currently counting against the Cowboys 53-man roster if they begin the season there, which is likelihood at this point, about as strong of a likelihood as there can be. They will have to be on the PUP list for the opening 6 weeks of the NFL season. But at the very least, they do not count against the 53-man roster. Now, I know there's been chatter about Bradley and I, but I just think he's so talented. We've been screaming for him to get time. He's obviously proven that he's capable of stuff in this year's preseason period. Dorrance Armstrong has really come on, no pun intended, strong so far this preseason. Terrell Basham, I love that the Cowboys have some depth at defensive end. Super pumped to see what Randy Gregory is going to be able to do this season. So yeah, 5 ends. Now let's go inside the defensive tackle. Neville Gallimore. Again, I want to make sure we're specific about this because I know these questions will arise. He will have to be carried on the 53-man roster initially to be put on injured reserve if the Cowboys want to be able to bring him back during the season. Carlos Watkins, Osa Odigizua, who's one of the more impressive rookies in this Cowboys draft class, Brent Urban, and Quentin Bohanna. None of these are shockers. None of these are, things that are going to make you freak out. All of these are rather predictable. But I told you that we were going to want to have to go long on the defensive side of the ball, which is why, you have to make some decisions on offense. At linebacker, Leighton Vander Esch, Keanu Neal, Micah Parsons, Jalen Smith, and Jabril Cox. Are you surprised by any of this? I mean, the depth here is really nice. And I don't have Luke Gifford making my 53-man roster at initial set because I think he's a candidate to potentially be brought back. I think the Cowboys, again, are going to have to get crafty with this kind of stuff. Not overly crafty, but they still have to be smart with how they adjust and plan and risk certain players on their roster. And none of these players you can risk. This is, in some senses, the deepest part of the Cowboys roster. Wide receiver is obviously the deepest position overall, but these are all players who, to some degree, we think highly of. We think highly of particular traits of all these players. And, I mean, the reality is that Jalen Smith might be the worst linebacker on this team, right, on this group. And I'm not trying to turn this into a more Jalen discussion, but if that's the case, I think you're doing all right for yourself overall. So those are our linebackers on the team. At corner, Lots of corners on this team right now. Trayvon Diggs, Anthony Brown, Jordan Lewis, rookies, Kelvin Joseph, and Deshaun Wright, Maurice Kennedy sandwiched right in there. And CJ Goodwin. CJ Goodwin, obviously a special teams ace, special team superstar, but he does count as a corner. You do have to count him this way. Obviously, emergencies arise, but these are the corners that I think we all believe in, or at least believe are going to be making the roster. I don't think we believe in them in that sense. Nothing is surprising here. I know that chatter had picked up when Maurice Kennedy really started to shine about Anthony Brown maybe being moved, maybe being a trade piece, maybe being cut. You don't want to do that right now. This is already a shaky position group, the position group with not a ton of depth, a position group that as it stands is going to have to lean on some really young players, 2 rookies. If you have any sign, any point of stable depth, you want to hold on to it because you're going to need it. That's the way the NFL rolls. That's why trading Leighton Vander Esch is something that doesn't necessarily make sense. Let's go to safety. Demonte KZ, Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker, Jaron Kearse, Darian Thompson, and Israel Mukuamu. Malik and Israel Mukuamu have already been activated from the reserve COVID-19 list, so they do count against the Cowboys 53-man roster. None of this shocking, but again, this is a lot of players. This is 6 safeties that we're talking about carrying here, and a lot of these are new. In fact, the only one who is not new, or only ones who are not new, are Donovan Wilson and Darian Thompson. So we've seen a bit of a transformation at the safety position for the Cowboys, which is good to see. This is a group that needed a lot of transformation. I don't know that we feel incredibly solid about it, but I think we do feel optimistic about it compared to recent seasons. And I know we've told that lie to ourselves before, but I like this safety group, and I think they can be enough that the Cowboys couldn't need this season. Hopefully that is the case. Now let's take a look at our defense. Actually, before we look at defense overall, we do have 2 specialists. All right, 2 specialists. And I know 2 specialists. There's not 3 here. We have a kicker in Greg Zuerlein, and we have a long snapper in Jake McQuaid. We'll get to looking at the defense as a whole in a second, but I did want to kind of highlight this because I think this is interesting. I know this is bold, and I'm not trying to just be bold and trying to be silly and trying to be whatever, but I think the Cowboys are going to cut Bryan Anger. And I know you're thinking like, dude, RJ, you're going to cut a punter? Cool. We'll just never punt. And that's not exactly what I'm saying. There is some chatter moving around that the Cowboys could be interested in a punter who is currently on another team. Last week, the Dallas Cowboys created some salary cap space by restructuring Ezekiel Elliott's contract, and Yahoo's Charles Robinson, friend of the show, tweeted out he would not be surprised if this is anticipating the availability of Los Angeles Rams punter Johnny Hekker. We know that John Fossil has a history with Johnny Hekker. John Fossil has a history with just about everybody in the Cowboys special teams group. He has a history with Greg Zuerlein. He has a history with, McQuaid. He has a history with really, literally 100% of his specialists that are not Bryan Anger. Johnny Hekker is somebody that if you follow the NFL as a whole, John Fossil has raved about before. If you like the fact that John Fossil has incorporated different, things, fake punts and whatnot, the reason he likes Johnny Hekker is that he has a quarterback background, not in the NFL, obviously. And so we've seen the Rams attempt a number of fake punts over the course of their time. He's obviously a captain for the Rams, as you can see in this photograph. And so he's somebody who has a high point of leadership. I could totally see John Fossil anticipating that he's going to be cut, knowing that that's going to happen. The Rams have had a situation evolve where it might make sense for them to move on from him. And so, yeah, I think because the Cowboys, because you look at roster decisions and how, and how you do have to be smart, right? Like how you can't, bet on a certain player being on the open market and potentially being poached. If your plan, if you're the Cowboys, is to ultimately sign Johnny Hekker, if you have kind of a handshake agreement with Johnny that might be the case, then why not just cut Bryan Anger? Because you know that you're ultimately going to end up signing Johnny Hekker. So my bold prediction, in a bit of a haphazard way, is that the Cowboys initially are rolling without a punter. But let's take a look at the defensive side of the ball. From top to bottom, at defensive end, we have DeMarcus Lawrence, Terrell Basham, Bradley and I on the other side, Randy Gregory, Dorrance Armstrong. In the middle, Neville Gallimore, Osa, Adigizua, Carlos Watkins, Brent Urban, and Quinton Bohanna. It wouldn't be a shocker to me to see Osa get far more snaps than Carlos Watkins when it's all said and done. At linebacker right now, Leighton Vander Esch, Keanu Neal, Jalen Smith, Jabril Cox, Micah Parsons. In the secondary, at corner, we have Trayvon Diggs, Maurice Kennedy, CJ Goodwin, Jordan Lewis, Deshaun Wright, Anthony Brown, and Kelvin Joseph. And Kelvin Joseph did suffer a groin injury on Sunday against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but he did tweet out that it was minor, that he would be back better. Nobody knows what that be back means. Does that mean be back tomorrow? Does that mean be back next week? Does that mean be back in 6 weeks? Obviously, any situation like that drastically changes the alteration of the 53-man roster. At safety, Donovan Wilson, Jaron Kearse, Israel Mukuamu, who had the interception against Jacksonville, Demonte KZ, Malik Hooker, and Darian Thompson. So those are the 53 players that I have making the Dallas Cowboys 53-man roster. But again, there are some things that can and will change. Again, to remind you, Neville Gallimore, Josh Ball, and Sean McEwen, all candidates to begin the season on injured reserve. That's 3 open roster spots that the Cowboys could create right away. But they do have 4 players on the reserve COVID-19 list. So they will have to bring those players back, which means they will have to get rid of somebody else to create one more roster spot. Potential returnees, if the Cowboys are looking to risk somebody and ultimately bring them back, these are players who are not on my 53-man roster that I think could come back in some capacity. Rondale Carter, who had a great moment. I mentioned the Israel Mukuamu interception on Sunday against the Jacksonville Jaguars. It was only something that happened because of Rondale Carter and how responsible he was for that play. Simi Fehoko, as mentioned, might be somebody the Cowboys stash on their practice squad, so still won't count against their 53-man roster. Luke Gifford, we talked about. Azur Kamara, who was a really big star on Hard Knocks already, and Nick Ralston. So ultimately, the Cowboys could try to stash some of these guys, could try to put some on practice squad, could ultimately want them on the 53-man roster. It just remains to be seen how they want to handle this, but that is where things stand at the moment. Tuesday, 3 p.m. Central Time is the deadline for all teams in the NFL to get down to 53 players on their roster. 1 hour before that, Tuesday, August 31st, 2 p.m. Central Time, we will be live here on the Blogging the Boys YouTube channel for our roster reaction show. We're going to be here for a little bit of time, an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, who knows, however long the party goes, to talk about the cuts that the Cowboys are making, to talk about other players around the NFL they should potentially be interested in, maybe your Johnny Heckers, maybe a quarterback, maybe a swing tackle, and to kind of figure this roster out and to talk about this player is going to go on injured reserve, this player is getting activated from the COVID list. There are a lot of moving parts, and we want to make sure that we explain all that for you and explain it with you. This is fun. We enjoy it, and we're excited to experience it with you on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Central Time. So, all that being said, we do have some roster predictions available at blogontheboys.com if you do want to go read those for yourself, to kind of, put some pen to paper, so to speak, participate in the comment section and whatnot. Obviously, the roster reaction show on Tuesday. Tuesday's a big day because we also got Hard Knocks. We'll be here live on the show afterwards, and we'll see how many we got right. Hopefully more than 10 is the goal. But yeah, so my name's RJ Ochoa. You know me, of course, from Blogging the Boys. You can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at RJOchoa. That's RJOCHOA. You can also email me, rj.ochoa@sbnation.com. 53 players, one team, one Super Bowl. That's kind of the way this all tends to go. Who do you have making your roster? Who do you think's going to make it that I don't have? Who do you not have making it that I have making it? I don't know. I'm curious. Let me know in the comments. But thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time.